Welcome to the third and last part of my Panzer II 1940 DLC overview. And as usual, before we get to the missions, I'd like to do a quick review of the entire DLC now that I've played it through. What do I think about it in general? Well, I think this is the best Panzer Corps DLC so far, and I'm really happy to see the game progressing as its add-ons keep coming out. One thing that 1940 stands out with is the incredible variety of missions. You've got a huge chunk of the DLC devoted to airborne landings. There is a naval landing and an entire aeroplane-only mission. The difficulty of the scenarios pleasantly ramps up as you increasingly find yourself in perilous situations where you have to retreat or make do with clearly insufficient forces. I've also been happy to see AI-controlled allies return. Unlike in Spanish Civil War DLC, the AI here gets the full combined arms package, has very strong units, is very active. And as a result, I'm guessing it's slightly easier for people to interact with than with the AI in Spain. My only niggle is that the AI is way too suicidal, rushing towards high-odds attacks and completely discounting terrain and positioning. Tanks left on hills and in marshes are a common sight. In the Battle of Abbeville, for example, and I'd really like to see that improved in future DLCs because I really like the idea of AI-controlled allies. On to another design element I've noticed emerging in this DLC, and it is very difficult secondary objectives. Starting with France, secondary objectives tend to involve a lot more fighting, quite often involving some of the best units the enemy have to offer, or having to cover a lot more heavily fortified ground. And I think this is a step in the right direction because it's a way to increase the challenge for the experienced players, while not really hiking the difficulty for those who just want to complete the missions. Training missions, while not particularly exciting, are an interesting and novel addition to the game, and are rather practical because they're a great way to beef up your less experienced troops. Once again, making the game slightly more palatable to less experienced players, and add some historical flavor as well. Are there many World War II themed games that have missions on the Channel Islands, for example? I think not. Now let's talk about a feature that I wasn't particularly interested in, but that has made a return to Axis operations, and I'm talking about the Nemesis system. In Spain, it was the fictional commander Vega, which died as soon as you killed him, and in 1940 you get the very non-fictional General de Gaulle, who continues returning and returning and returning and returning to your missions, no matter how often you kill him in battle. And you can guess that by Sea Line I was pretty peeved with this whole idea of de Gaulle just popping up everywhere in his very difficult to kill tank unit, because that's what a Nemesis is in this game right now, a difficult to kill tank unit. And I'm not dismissing the idea of a Nemesis as a concept, I just think there should be an understanding that a general doesn't fight. His troops do. And it's his posse that should be scary and very difficult to kill and dangerous, and de Gaulle and any other nemesis should sit in the back overlooking the battle. And I really saw some of it in the Battle of Abbeville mission, where you've got this huge pale-colored division said to be commanded by de Gaulle and having very strong, very experienced units as a whole. When I saw them for the first time, I really panicked. I saw that these guys are going to destroy my defensive lines, and they did. So your nemesis, in my opinion, should not be just prominent generals. They should be scary elite formations commanded by those prominent generals. This review is getting way too long already, so let's finish with a couple of points on the story. It goes without saying that I absolutely loved the inclusion of Rommel in this DLC, both mechanically through the looking for Waldo mission in Sedan and the participation of the AI-controlled 7th Division in battles, but also his participation in the briefings gave them a lot of new flavor. I I also loved the outcome of the Operation Sea Lion. On the one hand, it's kind of inevitable because Axis Operations is very much a sequel of the Grand Campaign of Panzer Corps 1, which hardly ever delved into alternative history, and Axis Operations hasn't done as well. So it's a good 1980s television way to get back into the historical course of the war. On the other hand, being able to launch a sea lion operation and then failing it inevitably is a rather unique take on this in games. I don't think I've ever played anything that had this kind of story. You go to Britain and you fail. Plus, it rather optimistically reflects what a real invasion would have looked like had it happened. But enough of the sad news, let's go straight to the missions, omitting obviously the training one because it's way too easy. Just explore it and get experience for your units. Right, let's finally talk about Sea Lion and our landing in Dover. A few general points. First, there will be no British ships here. They're somewhere else. Foreshadowing. There's also very little that can damage your ships on the coast, so feel free to use them. And that's exactly where we get to the only branch of British Armed Forces which is worth any mention here, the RAF. Expect 10 to 12 fighters and bombers to attack you on turn 1. There will also be some respawns during the mission, so watch out and bring crap loads of fighters. Air superiority is a must, and not just for defensive purposes. The landing areas are rather cramped and relatively well defended, so I recommend leaving your artillery on the French coast and bringing it later, meaning that for the first few turns your tactical bombers and fighter bombers will be the only fire support you'll get. I chose the beaches around Hythe for the landing because of the very convenient location in the center of the map and its equally convenient airfield. Once you take Hythe and your tanks and artillery are firmly on the ground, proceed to the most difficult objective of this scenario, Ashford. See, most of the defenders on this map are passive. They will sit in their trenches and will not run after your units. However, the guys stationed in and around Ashford are a completely different kind, and they have a bunch of tanks there. It's becoming a bit of a theme in this DLC that the secondary objectives are usually the hardest, so Ashford should be the location of your main thrust. The objectives east of Hythe are relatively poorly defended, and a strong infantry unit and naval bombardment from your ships will suffice to take them. Ironically, the radar towers do not have any proper AA protection, so you can just bomb them out and not worry about them. And obviously the southwestern part of the map is absolutely useless, don't go there, except for the radar towers. By the time you clear Ashford, your coastline objectives should already be accomplished, and the only thing you need to do at this point is redirect those Ashford attackers towards Canterbury, which is not particularly well defended either. Also, watch out for those 25-pounder guns. They're ubiquitous here, and they can switch to AT mode and cause unpleasant surprises. Brighton is where the British home fleet comes into the picture and completely destroys the measly navy-like scraps that the Germans have managed to gather. Don't expect your ships to survive, and don't count on destroying the British ones. You might bring a few strat bombers to thin out their numbers, but your main strategy here, in my opinion, should be to go inland away from the effective range of the ships. So your first milestone here is taking Hastings, the village Bavet, and setting up a line of defense between these objectives and into the forest north of them. The British will send a lot of tanks there, including, surprise surprise, De Gaulle again, and your main goal here is to grind through these guys as quickly as possible so that Hastings and that village Bavet are not under attack anymore. Once those tanks are done, run away from the coast towards Heathfield and that village above Hastings, and then towards Royal Tunbridge Wells, which in fact is the most difficult objective in this mission because of the entrenched infantry, artillery, and AAs, but take your time because Brighton and Newhaven are rather poorly defended, and you should prepare well for assaulting them because you have a very narrow window before the enemy navy catches wind of your actions in the west of the map and actually gets there and start bombarding you. Welcome to the most difficult scenario of this DLC and to one of the most difficult scenarios in this game, full stop. Epsom is very bad news, both in terms of the briefing, as we are told that Sea Line is failing, and we are supposed to do this kamikaze rush to distract the British from our retreat. Epsom will also hit you hard in the gonads if you try to attack it straight on. Frontal attacks are suicidal and the British are getting constant reinforcements from the top corners of the map, as you're trying to take objectives right next to them. One thing you should remember is that you only need to hold 5 main objectives and you already have 2. The fortifications are a bigger problem because they're spread all over and you have to hold all of them at the same time, and that London raid hex, yeah, you have to hold that as well. So my strategy here is a pincer move through Sevenoaks. That area is very easy to defend and I've found that most of the British reinforcements are coming from Bromley. This way you can meet them head on and not worry about your flanks because most of the troops on the map are static, especially those entrenched ones. However, I recommend taking the airfield north of Crawley. The British will not counterattack there and this is a very nice position for your main airbase on this map. Now, once the area around Sevenoaks is clear, advance north and northwest. Croydon should be your main target at this point. You should also look out for enemy reinforcements on your right flank there, so try to maintain something resembling a defensive line there, especially against tanks. Remember that the defenders in Red Hill will not try and punch you in the belly, so you can be safe there. Once you're safe around Croydon, advance towards the Raid London hex, and it is a good idea to block the bridge right next to it. The entrenched infantry east of it will remain static, so don't worry about it, but there might be some reinforcements coming from the other side of the Thames, including De Gaulle. God, this guy is more annoying than ever. Anyway, if you get this far, you are pretty much winning this scenario. Move towards Epsom, a lot of good long-range artillery will be very helpful here. That AA and artillery cluster in the town is very difficult to untangle, but once it's crushed, just advance with your infantry through the forest and take the last fortification. Well, next to last, because we've still got Red Hill, and newsflash, you don't have to take the town itself, just the fortification, and it will not take a lot of forces to do that because, once again, those defenders are static. Also, blocking those bridges in the west might help you defend against counterattackers and especially De Gaulle. And finally, guess what? In addition to everything else, this map has a secret. And what a secret it is. Land your paratroopers in the completely undefended airfield in the northwestern corner of the map to get 666 prestige points and a bunch of, quote, extremely bizarre aircraft blueprints. What could it be? I guess the upcoming Cthulhu-powered flying apparatuses DLC is gonna clear things up. Good news, everyone! The worst is over. Well, at least for now. Portsmouth is an easier scenario where we finally get to avenge the destruction of our naval fleet. In fact, it's one of the objectives, so load up on strategic bombers and don't forget about the submarines at the bottom right corner of the map. In fact, the submarines are going to be your main asset in destroying the enemy capital ships, so make sure you keep them alive and not far from the action. On the coast, your initial maneuver is very easy. Advance towards Portsmouth with all of your troops. Don't leave anyone behind and relocate your aircraft as soon as possible. Portsmouth itself is not particularly well defended, and given that the only AA gun in the area is out in the open, this is a perfect killing field for your tactical bombers. As soon as your tanks destroy all of the easy pickings around Portsmouth, you should retreat with them about halfway towards your initial position and build up a screen against the pursuing British forces. With a couple of 88mm flaks as AT guns and some bomber supports, it will become an impenetrable wall. Now, once your infantry clears Portsmouth, it's not going to be too difficult. You should advance towards Southampton with all of your troops not engaged in deflecting that British attack. There is some AA and artillery waiting for you in Southampton, but it's nothing a couple of strong infantry units and long-range mortars can't handle. we can finally pat ourselves on the back having run away from Britain. But there's not too much time to do that because another loser Axis nation is about to fail again. In the Battle of Pindus, the Italians have got themselves in quite a bit of a pickle in the Valona area. Right off the bat, these guys will be inevitably encircled on turn 2. Most of them will end up dead, and your task here is to get as many out as you can and deal as much damage to the enemy as you can. As for the German relief force, don't take any planes, as the briefing suggests. The weather is going to be consistently terrible and the Greeks don't have any planes. Having a fast and strong tank unit or two on this map is actually kinda useful despite all of the hills and mountains. The enemy will try to flank you with strong cavalry units and tanks are a good counter to that. Otherwise, convert your best infantry into mountaineers with half-tracks, bring as much artillery as you can, and just grind through the enemy forces. Barring the small counterattacks by Greeks, there is not too much strategy to this. It's gonna be a meat grinder here, especially with encircled Italians, and I found that the route leading northwest is the easiest one for them to get out of the encirclement. Remember that, like in Epsom, you don't have to take any of the main objectives, you already control what you need. You will most probably eliminate the 5 Greek commanders as part of this battle pretty early on, and eventually your main goal will be just to raid Metova, because it's on the other side of the map. There will be some Greek stragglers obviously defending, which is not hard in the hills and mountains. Also, watch out for a small counter-attacking force hiding north, just north of Metova. I feel like there's hidden meaning to the Valona mission and I'm completely missing it. It's incredibly easy. You've got this huge map full of all sorts of objectives, but you only have to keep 3, and all 3 are in the city of Valona itself, which is surrounded by bottlenecks created by hills and bodies of water. So set up your heaviest tanks in the plains and covering that bridge, plop your infantry in the hills and the forests, cover all of them with craploads of artillery, and just wait for the Greeks to come and die. Oh, and it's not strictly necessary, but you can retreat your Italian troops from the east and center of the map, as most of them will have the time to run away from the advancing Greeks. And that's it for 1940 DLC. I've really enjoyed it. And actually, there's more than just the interesting missions and new cool features that I'm looking for in 1941. Capitana Anna is having a baby! Alright, thanks for listening and checking this video out, everyone. If you like this stuff, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm really looking forward to new people coming in. And also check the description for this video for links to my Twitch and Twitter profile, where I regularly post game-related stuff and upcoming stream announcements. Cheers.